What is going on, RP fam? Welcome back to another video. So happy you decided to join me. It is week 14. I have start sit for you today. I am bringing you all updated positions, all updated tiers across the board. I want to prep you guys because it is a crucial week. We have the fantasy playoffs quickly approaching. We need to stack wins now to cement our spot in those playoffs, hopefully. If you guys have any questions, drop those down below. I love the engagement. Before we hop into it, want to let you know, I am sick. I am doing my best to power through this video because it is a crucial week and every decision that we make matters. Please drop a like if you enjoy the content today and subscribe to the channel if you have not already done so. Relentless Press is oh so close to our first 1,000 subscribers. We would love to have you guys along for the journey. Click the button, allow notifications so you do not miss anything. Now I am going to start with my defenses. I'm going top 16 for that as well as kickers. At quarterback, I do top 25. And for running backs and wide receivers, I do top 36. Try to give you guys some flex options. At tight end, I rounded out with my top 16. Let's start it. At defenses in tier 1 with New Orleans Saints, the best defense to go this week against that Carolina Panthers offense that can't do anything. The Houston Texans are in at number 2. They're actually coming off of 3 top 10 showings in their last 4 games, and they now get to face a quarterback who does not even want to play. Zach Wilson would remain on the bench if he could. Unfortunately, the Jets don't have any other options. Count me in against the defense playing that situation. Houston is going to continue their improbable playoff run as they decimate New York. Tier 2 starts with the San Francisco 49ers. They just creamed the Seahawks team 31-13 a couple weeks ago. I don't think it'll be that ugly here, but it certainly could be. Number 4 is the Baltimore Ravens against the Rams. And rounding out my top 5, I have Miami. This Dolphins team has been a top 4 shower in 3 straight weeks on the backs of back-to-back games with defensive touchdowns. I don't know if they do that against Tennessee, but they'll be fine. At 6, I have the Detroit Lions. A defense has been beatable, specifically the secondary. I'm not sure that Chicago can fully take advantage of it. I still like Detroit to bounce back. They need to stack wins now that Minnesota and the Packers have gotten to 500. Speaking of the Packers, I have them next at 7 at the top of tier 3. They get a Giants team that does not scare anyone. Cleveland is at 8, and at 9 I have the Jacksonville Jaguars. And at 10, I have my Minnesota Vikings. They have quietly become a fearsome unit so far this season. They've allowed 21 points or less in 7 of their last 9 games. The Raiders are not going to be able to move the ball much on the ground against Minnesota, and I certainly don't fear Aiden O'Connell through the air. So Minnesota is going to post their 3rd top 12 showing in their last 4 games. Tier 4 starts with the Indianapolis Colts against Cincinnati. I just don't know that Jake Browning does what he did on Monday night again now that there is tape on him. At 12, I have the Tampa Bay Bucks. Atlanta's offense has been hit or miss. They're better against the run, and guess what? That is what Tampa Bay stops. The New York Jets are at 13. Houston's offense scares me. That Jets secondary is elite. Strength versus strength. That's why the Jets dropped down this week. Tier 5 is Dallas, the Chargers, and then my final defense, the Denver Broncos in that same game against LA. I think both of these teams just might cancel each other out, but there is also risk that this game turns into a shootout. Roll the dice here if you're feeling lucky. Denver has posted a top showing in 4 of their last 5. My kickers in week 14 begin with Matt Gay. Continues to get opportunities. Cincinnati's defense has been a train wreck, and the mustache continues to put up points for Indianapolis. Speaking of points, Dallas scores them in bunches. They will again against Philly. I like Brandon Aubrey at 2. Justin Tucker rounds out my top 3. He's made 2 field goals or more in back-to-back games. He's going to get at least a few chances against the Rams. Los Angeles surrenders nearly 10 points per game to the position. That is 7th most in the NFL. And the Ravens offense I expect to be humming coming out of their bye week. Blake Groupie ends my first tier. He is in at 4. I have no idea if I'm saying his name right. Sounds kind of funny, but I like it, so I'm going to go with it. Tier 2 begins at 5 with Younghoe Koo against Tampa, and at 6 and 7 are 2 great offensive teams, Jason Sanders for Miami and Jake Moody for the 49ers. Tier 3 begins with that Tyler Bass, Harrison Butker showdown in Kansas City. Both of those guys should be good starts. Rounding out my top 10 is Riley Patterson. He rebounded last week after scoring just 3 points in the 2 weeks prior. He posted a top 10 finish against the Saints. Now, Patterson has excellent matchups in each of the next 3 games, so he is a great add off of waivers if he's available, should his previous owner have lost faith in him. My 4th and final tier begins with Will Lutz, and then is Greg Joseph against Vegas at 12. Chase McLaughlin is next at 13, Matt Amendola is at 14, and I have Nick Folk and Cameron Dicker rounding out my kickers in week 14. Quarterbacks are up next, and Tier 1 number 1 starts with Dak Prescott. He massacred Philly back in week 9. He tossed for 374, a trio of tutties on his way to the overall quarterback 2 finish. I think an encore at home is almost certain. Prescott has been fantasy's best quarterback since week 8, and in that time, the Eagles have surrendered the 8th highest yards per attempt, the 2nd most passing scores, and the 3rd highest passer rating. This game will help Dak heat up that MVP conversation. He is going to carry owners to the playoffs with a gigantic performance. Number 2 is Josh Allen, and at 3 I have Tua Tagovailoa off a big game against Washington. He does the same here against Tennessee. Jalen Hurts continues to ball with that rushing upside. He's in at 4, and rounding out my top 5, speaking of rushing upside, Lamar Jackson, where you at? Guy has not had a rushing score since I think week 3. He needs to turn it on, and he will against the Rams. A surprising leader in tier number 2 for me. All the way up at 6, I have Jordan Love. This guy has earned the ranking respect at this point. He is fantasy's quarterback 9 overall. He's also posted 4 straight finishes in the top 12 and is in another smash spot here against the Giants. New York has given up the 7th most yards per completion and the most passing yardage in their last 3 games. Let Love carry you to a playoff berth as he tries to do the same for the Pack. Number 7, dropping a bit, is Patrick Mahomes. Back-to-back weeks outside of quarterback 1 range, but he should be in a shootout with Buffalo. He is fine here. Brock Purdy continues to light it up. He will do that again against the Seahawks. I like him at 8. And at 9, I have Jared Goff against Chicago. Goff already has 5 top 12 finishes this season. He's one of the most underappreciated roster pieces in fantasy. The Goff-father should shred Chicago's single high look. Goff ranks 4th in yards per attempt and 8th in fantasy points per drop back against it. The Bears also surrender the 2nd fewest yards per rush this season. Very surprising, but that means Detroit is going to go with what works and lean on Goff's arm. Tier 3 begins rounding out my top 10 with CJ Stroud. Guy is the rookie of the year, an MVP dark horse, and an absolute stud. Cannot wait to see what he does against that Jets secondary. Justin Fields always has that rushing upside. I like him at 11 against Detroit. My last QB1 in week 14 is Gardner Minshew. He continues to defy logic. The mustache has finished as a top 13 or higher quarterback in back-to-back weeks. He's had 41 attempts or more in each game, and the matchup with Cincy is going to make it 3 in a row across the board. The Bengals' back end has been a bottom 3 unit since week number 8. They've allowed the highest yards per attempt and the 6th highest passer rating. Minshew Mania will roll on with a fury as we get to the fantasy playoffs. Tier 4 begins with my lucky number 13. It is Josh Dobbs. I like him in a bounce back game against Vegas. Number 14 is Geno Smith. Looked great last week against Dallas. Might do the same against San Francisco, but he did just get lit up by them only a few weeks ago. Number 15, tumbling down my rankings, is Justin Herbert. I have to do it after back-to-back off weeks. He might be fool's gold again this week against Denver. They have been lights out as a secondary since week 8. The Broncos have allowed the second lowest passer rating and the fewest passing touchdowns in that span. And Herbie has posted a quarterback 1 finish, which is top 12, in only half of his last 6 games. I know at this point in a crucial week, it is hard to bench your studs, but I would not blame anybody for making that move with Herbie here. My sweet 16 is Russell Wilson, who has thus far used amazing efficiency and some rushing upside to continually post solid numbers for us. I like him in a good matchup here against the Chargers. My 5th tier starts with Baker Mayfield. He has cooled off since his midseason tear, but he remains a viable number 2 option with upside. The Falcons secondary, at least outside of AJ Terrell, does not scare me, and that guy's dealing with a concussion. We do not know if he's going to be cleared to play. The Bake Show gives you a solid floor this week, and he can even crack the top 10 if Mike Evans continues to roll. Jake Browning is at 18 against Indy. I think there is more, I would say, risk than people like to admit, but we saw him look great on Monday night, and if he continues that against a poor Indy secondary, that would not surprise me either. Matthew Stafford is at 19, and Joe Flacco, if he plays, will round out my top 20. I think he actually has decent upside against a Jacksonville defense that has looked worse than expected over the last couple of weeks. My 6th and final tier, I would not suggest starting unless you're desperate. Desmond Ridder is the best of the bunch in a great matchup with Tampa. Jameis Winston is next at 22 if he plays. Derek Carr could be there as well. I would not like either of those guys against Carolina. That Panthers defense has held quarterbacks in check. Tommy DeVito is at 23, and my 24th ranked quarterback is Will Levis. The last quarterback I have ranked in week 14 is Bryce Young. He has just 1 passing score in his last 4 games, and he has not cracked double-digit fantasy points since back in week 9. So even in super flex leagues, I would rather play a high upside wide receiver or running back. Chugging right along, running backs are up next. My tier 1, number 1 is Christian McCaffrey, and at 2 I have Alvin Kamara. He could go consecutive weeks with a top 2 finish in a smash matchup here with Carolina. The Panthers have allowed the 3rd most rushing scores and the 4th highest missed tackles per attempt. Kamara is going to leverage his top 3 usage and carry the Saints no matter who ends up playing quarterback for New Orleans. Tier 2 starts with Bijan Robinson, and Zach Moss is next at 4. Saquon Barkley rounds out my top 5. He should crush the pack. And at 6, I have Joe Mixon. He is set up to explode for the 2nd straight week with this matchup in Indianapolis. They've had a laughable run defense over the last 5. The Colts have the 2nd lowest stuff rate. They've also allowed the 4th highest yards per carry against gap runs. Now, the majority of Mixon's damage comes on gap concepts, and the volume that he has had will continue to be insane. So the Bengal back will post his 3rd 100-yard effort in his last 4 tries. Tier 3 starts with Kyren Williams. This is not as bad of a matchup as it looks like on paper against Baltimore. Derrick Henry is next at 8. The Titans are going to ride him against Miami because that secondary, specifically those corners out wide, since Jalen Ramsey's return, have been brutal. Rachaad White is in at 9. He racked up 99 total yards on 19 touches the last time he faced the Dirty Birds. Atlanta has gone backwards as a unit defending the run. They rank bottom 12 in stuff rate, missed tackle rate, and yards per contact per attempt allowed. White is going to take advantage on his way to a big day. The last running back I have in my top 10 is James Cook, who has come alive since the Bills fired their offensive coordinator. At 11 is Travis Etienne. He gets a good matchup against Cleveland. And my last RB1 is Austin pound for pound Eckler. If he can't get it right here against Denver, he just might not do it in 2023. Great matchup for him. I think he will take advantage. Tier 4 starts with my lucky number 13. It's Jahmyr Gibbs. He is going to be the more heavy utilized back against the Bears. Chicago has been extremely vulnerable against pass catchers out of the backfield. They allow the third most receptions and the second most yards per catch to rushers. We know that Detroit prefers utilizing him in those ways. So if he can break a screen or two, he has week winning potential. At 14, I have Josh Jacobs. He's going to see all the touches, but Minnesota's run defense has been stout. And at 15, it is Devon Achane against Tennessee. Isaiah Pacheco gets bumped down. He is at 16 because of that shoulder injury that he is dealing with. Tony Pollard is down to 17. Difficult matchup with Philadelphia, but he will see looks as the Cowboys try to remain balanced. My 5th tier starts with Javonte Williams. He ranks 8th in explosive run rate over the last 2 games, averaging 18 touches and 70 total yards. Now, although he is a top 24 player in weighted opportunities, he is yet to find the end zone this season. I think that'll change against the Chargers here, who have been destroyed on the ground, giving up 4.7 yards per carry over their last 3. Breece Hall has been dead as a rusher over the last month or so. He's saving owners with his passing game usage, probably does the same against Houston. Rounding out my top 20 is DeAndre Swift. Tough matchup against Dallas, and Raheem Mostert is at 21 against Tennessee as the second back for Miami. My 6th tier starts with David Montgomery, and at 23, I have Jerome Ford. He has averaged over 16 touches and 70 total yards in his last 5, but the big news here is he is splitting work in the red zone with Kareem Hunt. That lack of touchdown upside is holding him back, but there is some reason for optimism here. The Jaguars have devolved against the run since week 9. They've surrendered the second highest explosive run rate and the highest missed tackles per attempt. Gus Edwards is at 24, always touchdown upside in that Ravens rushing offense. My last running back in my top 25 is Chuba Hubbard, who should use plenty of volume as the RB1 bona fide in Carolina's backfield against the Saints. Tier 7 starts with Alexander Mattison, who continues to hold on to that RB1 role in Minnesota. He's played 60% of the snaps over the past 2 games. He's also averaging over 15 touches, 70 total yards in that span, and most importantly, he remains Minnesota's red zone option. Now, unfortunately for him, this Raiders defense has been a brick wall. Vegas has held backs to the lowest yards after contact per attempt, the 6th lowest rushing score rate, and the 8th lowest explosive run rate. So if you can afford to bench Alexander I would say not so great in this game, I would certainly do it. A.J. Dillon is at 27, and DJ Dallas is probably the last back left standing in Seattle, with both K9 and Zach Charbonnet being banged up. Not a great start against San Francisco, but the volume is going to be there. Tyjae Spears might see more usage than usual. I crashed that. He will see more usage than usual against Miami. They love him in the screen game, and guess what? The Dolphins are going to score points. Tennessee has to keep up, so I think Spears has a solid performance. My 8th and final tier begins with Dameon Pierce. He is the Texans' back to start this week, but I'm not sure that is worth much. He's going to need to fall into the end zone to hit, and New York has been famously stout up front. At 31, I have Keaton Mitchell. 32 is Kareem Hunt, and then Roshan Johnson and Khalil Herbert, both backs for the Bears, are up next. I'm finishing out this week's running backs with Devin Singletary and Ty Chandler. Basically, every one of these guys are bottom of the barrel options and avoids if possible. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so. Now on to wide receivers. Tier 1 begins as always with Tyreek Hill, and at 2 I have CeeDee Lamb against Philly. In at number 4, and welcome back, it is Justin Jefferson. He should pick up right where he left off against Vegas. the Raiders are allowing top 10 numbers to perimeter wideouts. Jet has a 26% target share, 38% air yard share this season, and he's racked up 3 yards per route run. He should shred Vegas. A.J. Brown rounds out my top 5 and is the last player in my first tier. On to tier 2, it begins with Keenan Allen. This guy is first in targets, second in target share, and 11th in red zone targets thus far. As Justin Herbert's most dependable option, Allen is going to use that volume in this brutal matchup. Stephon Diggs is at 7, and next up is Mike Evans, who continues to defy logic at 8. My 9th ranked wide receiver is DJ Moore. He went lion hunting in week 11 against Detroit, racking up 96 yards and a score on 9 targets, and in this one he could best those numbers. The Lions surrender 30 points per game to receivers. That's 10th most in the league. They've also allowed 5 passing scores in their last 3. My third tier begins with Jamar Chase. He rounds out my top 10. Michael Pittman is at 11, and my last wide receiver 1 in week 14 is Nico Collins. He went nuclear last week, a $191. He racked up a 43% target share, 57% air yard share, 55% first read share, and an otherworldly 6.6 yards per route run. Now I know that the Jets secondary is top notch, but Collins is a must start with Tank Dell out of it. Clearly the usage is going to be there based on those numbers, and I do not expect much support from this Texans rushing attack. It is Nico to the moon. Next up is Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. Both of these San Francisco wide receivers have dominated at separate points during the season. I'm not sure who gets it against Seattle. Maybe both of them do, but I like both of their upside enough to have them as smash starts. My fourth tier begins with Chris Olave. He will see hefty usage as Rashid Shaheed deals with a thigh issue. Now the Panthers have shut down outside wideouts all year, so he will need it. Olave has posted 4 straight top 20 showings in a crumbling offense with shaky and unpredictable quarterback play, so talent will win out. Continue to fire Olave up. Jalen Waddle is at 16, and I have Devontae Adams against Minnesota up next. Devontae Smith is at 19. Devontae Smith is at 18, and at 19, and the last player in my fourth tier, I have DK Metcalf. My fifth tier begins with Rashee Rice. He will continue to be fed as the lone threat in the Chiefs' wide receiver room. Over the last 2 weeks, Rice has played over 60% of the snaps on offense. He's compiled a 28% target share, a 34% first read share, and racked up 3.42 yards per route run. In what should be a shootout, Rashee is likely to see 9+ targets for the 3rd straight game. Puka Nacua is at 21, and next up is Courtland Sutton against the Chargers. My 23rd ranked wide receiver is Tyler Lockett, and starting tier 6 at 24, I have Cooper Kupp. Zay Flowers is next, and at 26 is Calvin Ridley. He has been maddening to own in 2023. He's at 4 wide receiver 1 finishes and also 5 games outside of the top 60. He is going to be boom or bust here again. Cleveland has given up bottom 10 numbers to perimeter wideouts, so I am fading Ridley as a must-start option in a must-win week for many owners. Brandon Cooks rounds out my 6th tier, and starting my 7th tier is Gabe Davis, who has plenty of upside and might hit big against Kansas City. If he gets a deep shot in that game, which Allen should try, he will hit for you. Garrett Wilson is at 29. He gets an excellent matchup here against Houston. They've surrendered top 5 production to perimeter receivers since week number 8. However, we know that might not matter as Zach Wilson returns to New York starting quarterback spot. I do not blame you if you want to bet on the talent, but the floor could easily bottom out here completely. At 30, I have DeAndre Hopkins, tough matchup against Miami, and Drake London in a smash matchup is still down at 31 because Desmond Ridder. At 32 is Jaden Reed, and my 8th and final tier starts with Zay Jones. Adam Thielen is at 34. He has just 27 yards on 9 targets over his last 2 games. Now, he's likely still the number 1 option in that passing offense, but that is not saying much. Bench him at this point if you can. JSN is at 35, and the last wide receiver I am covering in Week 14 is Josh Downs. We are nearing the end. Tight ends are the last position I am covering. Tier 1, number 1 as usual, is Travis Kelce. He's churned out 3 consecutive top 7 finishes, at least 80 yards or a score in every contest. This is a must-win game for both teams. I think Kelce steps up in it and delivers for managers. Sammy Laporta is in at 2, and my second tier begins with TJ Hawkinson. He will be just fine with Justin Jefferson coming back. Hawk was the tight end 4 in fantasy from weeks 1 to 5 with Jet in the lineup, racking up 1.54 yards per route run, a 19% target share, and a 22% first read share. Dobbs clearly trusts him and will continue to feed him. Jake Ferguson is up at 4. My last tight end in my top 5 is George Kittle. My third tier begins with Dalton Kincaid, and I have Taysom Hill next at 7. He is dealing with both foot and hand issues, and he might not be able to go this week. And if he sits, Juwan Johnson becomes a borderline top 12 start. That's if he goes, because he is also dealing with a quad injury, a lot of injuries at the tight end position. Isaiah Likely is at 8, and my fourth tier begins with Cole Kmet. He will exploit a second level that has not had an answer for opponent tight ends all year. Detroit has given up the 9th most fantasy points per game and the 3rd most scores to the position. David Njoku rounds out my top 10, and Evan Ingram is in at 11 in a difficult matchup against Cleveland. My 5th and final tier starts with Cade Otton, and I have Gerald Everett as my lucky number 13. Pretty good upside against Denver. Kyle Pitts is at 14, and at 15 is Tyler Conklin. He is worth a desperation shot against Houston. The Texans allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game and the 4th most receiving yards to the position. Conklin also has 6 finishes in the top 20 this year and 14 targets over the last 2 weeks. My last tight end option is Brevin Jordan, and that will do it for my tight ends this week. And that is everything that I have in week 14. We are going to call it. Please consider dropping a like on the video if you enjoyed the content today. Subscribe to the channel as well. So close to 1,000 subscribers. Would love to have you along with us for the journey. Drop your questions and your comments down below. I absolutely love the engagement, and I want to be able to help you out. To all of my current subscribers out there, thank you guys so very much. Could not and would not do it without you. Let's keep pushing for 1,000. This is Relentless Press. I am your host, Abrium Opats, and I will see you